Hello, welcome to bookstore number 1. I'm the proprietor of this place. My name is Georgia Court, and I'm very happy to see all of you here. I just love when the Hermitage Artist Retreat is with us. It is like the best, thank you. But I'm only here to say hello and to introduce you to James Monahan, who's the program director at the Hermitage Artist Retreat, and he's going to tell you all about our wonderful reader. I see her standing there looking expectant. Hello, Jamila. Here we go. All right, James.
Thank you so much, Georgia. Hi, everybody. Thanks for your patience. We're so excited to be here. That is, I think, the definition of a two-way street. We couldn't be more pleased anytime we have the opportunity to be at Bookstore 1 in this beautiful venue of reading and learning and sharing. So you've got Jamila's bio. Hopefully you got it when you came in. So maybe in the interest of getting straight to it, since we're a moment or two behind, I will let you review that at your leisure and then ask you to go ahead and join me in welcoming Jamila to the stage. This evening we thought we would talk a little bit. I've got a couple.
There's a switch on the microphone. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, everybody.
We would talk for a moment or two. We may be honored with a selection from Moonrise Over New Jessup, your debut novel, and we'll talk, and we'll have plenty of time for your questions as well. So do be thinking about what you're curious about. Maybe I'll start with the very beginning. We can jump in the Wayback Machine. You, being an author is something of a second career. Am I correct in thinking that you initially had a successful career as a lawyer?
As successful as any trial attorney can be. You win some, you lose some.
I think by definition, yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you got to the law and what that means to you, and then how that transitioned into this incredible career as a writer?
Of course, and again, I just want to say thank you, everybody. And thank you for having me, and especially thank you to the Hermitage and to Bookstore 1 for making this whole possible. Better? So how did I get into the law? I got there because my mama, when I was graduating from college, she said, "You are going to go to graduate school and I am not going to pay for it." That's a very short answer. The long answer is I come from a family that believes in social justice and advocacy. And so for me, the choice was sort of very obvious that I wanted to do work that felt like I was doing social justice work. And being a lawyer was one of the best ways I thought to really have a hand in making social change. And so that's why I chose to take the avenue. And yeah, I mean, I won more than I lost, I like to say. So I mean, I feel like that's a win. But yeah, I mean, I had to take some lumps too, but I learned a lot along the way.
And how did those experiences as a trial attorney push you or allow you or enable you to think about being a writer? Was that always in there and needed some permission to come out, or what was that like?
So I always loved to write, even when I was in high school. And I came up in a high school that taught the canon, which was not, a lot of times didn't have books with people who looked like me, and so my mom was very active in getting books that I would see people who looked like me and see people who were telling stories that I knew. And so she introduced me to Toni Morrison fairly young, and I remember I was taking a creative writing class in high school, and I wrote this ghost story, which is actually a really good ghost story. It will, at some point in my life, make a reappearance. I've matured, so I can see there were some plot holes, but it's still a really good story. But when I wrote the story and I got it back from my teacher, he gave me a D. And he said, "You will do well in my class not to try to imitate Toni Morrison." And I thought,
how's that for a reaction?
well, you know what? But you know, on the one hand, it was really demoralizing. You're in high school, you're sort of learning your voice. But on the other hand, in hindsight, I'm like, he was calling me Toni Morris. So you know, but it was so I always had that sort of creative spirit. But you know, you're learning and you know, at that point, I didn't really understand the sort of genius of her work and what she was doing in the social justice and the advocacy space by literally just telling stories about people who could have been my aunt's and uncles. But then I got into the law, and I don't know if there are any lawyers in here. So,
of course.
Of course. And so, you know that legal writing is everything but creative. And in fact, you can get sanctioned for being a little bit too creative in legal writing. And so, you know, I used to have a great deal of fun with the fact sections, because that's where you really get to like make your case, but it's also an opportunity to introduce the court, the jury, to the people that you're representing. And so I found that there's still storytelling in it, but legal writing is generally very technical. And so I wanted to sort of flex those muscles and use that voice in sort of a space that didn't feel so constrained to just, you know, the legal sphere. So I sort of made the jump.
And do you find that there is a bridge of any kind between either experiences or either in like law school or in the courtroom that prepared you for this career as a writer? Either some of those technical things or some of the people you met or some of the challenges you had to overcome as part of that process? Or is it totally like that was phase one and now we are in phase two?
No, I mean, I don't think you can take your sort of lawyer hat off. I mean, if you can, somebody tell me how. But I do think that my writing, because of my experience, you know, the body of my experience is such that I am trained to be a civil rights lawyer and a social justice advocate. My work is always going to take that bend. And in fact, when I was in law school, I went to the Howard University School of Law, which I'm very proud of. And so when I was taking my Con Law 1 class, my professor at the time said, "We are not going to talk about the civil rights movement here." And I'm thinking, what are we going to talk about? And he said, "We're not talking about the civil rights movement in the way that you've been taught about it. We're going to talk about the freedom rights movement. I want you to think about the framing, and the language that you use makes a difference." And so every time we had a case, or every time we read a case, or talked about a case, or talked about different precepts in the law, it was with an eye single toward defining, sort of figuring out what freedom was. And I thought that was just such an interesting way to approach the ideas that we were talking about. You know, now one of the things we're talking about is the 14th Amendment. But it was like the 14th Amendment came out of the desire for formerly enslaved people to be recognized, to have freedom in the United States, and for their children to be recognized as full citizens of the United States. And so, you know, I think about what it was like for them to walk out of those conditions of bondage into freedom that they didn't know how to give language to. And so it really made me think about, it really framed how I approached my legal career, how I approached my writing career. It's always coming from this question: what does freedom look like, taste like, feel like, smell like? And what is it about my active freedom that requires the oppression of somebody else? And so it's that sort of constant question that goes on in my mind, and then you see it in my writing, I hope.
I think so. Certainly that interrogation of like facts and the very specific use of language as a common bridge between the two careers. Now earlier I said debut novel, but and I haven't asked this yet, but I have to imagine there's lots of other steps before we get to this successful novel that's now out in the world. And I'm curious, when you make that transition away from law and commit to writing, what are some of the really early things that you encountered? Shorter fiction, other forays into different sort of nonfiction or other mediums, or what did you have to do to get ready to come up with this masterpiece, this work?
Thank you. So I did, I was writing short fiction while I was still practicing law. I'm a early morning writer, so I would get up at like 4 o'clock and I'd do some work, and it was usually short fiction pieces.
Sorry, did you say 4 o'clock?
Yes, I told you, you know that, because that's what time I get up now. And my hermits, I have not changed my schedule.
Okay.
But it's beautiful because I get to see, as an aside, getting up at that hour of the day, you see the rising gray, right? You see the things that we don't typically get to see when we're constantly focused on the next, like, I jump out of bed, I have this thing I have to do, and then I work out, I eat my breakfast, I get it. So I get to, that to me is a gift, to be able to see the rising gray of the day.
I love that.
Right? So then I wrote another novel that's in a drawer, another great idea that I will be returning to at some point. But it's 742 pages, and so I decided to take a crack at some more short fiction, and so this book actually started as a short story. And it was just going to be sort of this interrogation and this, a holiday dinner right after Brown was decided, where everybody at the dinner table has a different opinion about Brown. And as I was writing, Alice, who is the main person, I don't write characters because I feel like that's a little bit too marginalizing. So Alice, the main person in the story, she is the person that I envision when you have a photograph. Yeah, I'm a sucker for old family photographs. And so, what happens inevitably is I'll be talking to an elder and I'll point to all these people and they say, oh, he was a Tuskegee Airman and she was this and they were that. And then I'll say, well, who's this? And their name is gone, because it was the person in the family that wasn't all those things. And so they're sort of the first person to disappear from memory. And so I thought, that's who I wanted, because she had, I remember in the photograph in my mind, she has this, what I call an Alabama smile. Is anybody here from Alabama? So it's sort of that very knowing smile. There's a lot hidden behind the smile, but because it doesn't come out, we don't get the fullness of who the woman is. So I said, after about 15 minutes of writing, I had this vision in my head. I said, this is a novel. This is her novel, and I want to hear her voice from cover to cover. And so that's what I did. And so the book was just going to be a collection of sort of my family's anecdotes. Were from a place called Demopolis, Alabama, which is wonderful. If you all ever have a chance to go, it's right at the convergence of the Tombigbee and the Black Warrior River. And so we have this really colorful family history. So I thought, I'm the baby cousin. Whenever there's a story that's told in my family, my version is perpetually overruled because I don't know what I'm talking about. So I said, I'm going to write a novel and I'm going to fictionalize all these stories. And then that way y'all can't overrule me, because, and then I thought I was just going to self-publish it and just take it around Alabama, showing it to my family, saying, here it's a book, so my story is true. And
here it is in black and white.
Here it is in black and white. And so about a month before the deadline, I saw an advertisement for the Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. This is a prize that Barbara Kingsolver endows to reward people who are writing socially engaged fiction. It's for debut novels. And I thought, well, maybe this is a story that people haven't heard before. My legal training, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there about creating municipalities and sort of these different ideologies around independence. So I thought, I'll throw my hat in the ring. My mama used to say nothing beats a failure like a try. The worst thing that happened is Barbara Kingsolver didn't call me and say that I won. And really, Barbara Kingsolver called me and did say I won. And so then I ended up publishing the book, and I thought, if I really want to do this right, then I need to give this book and this career full attention. So that's the very long version of how I get to sit with y'all tonight and have this beautiful conversation.
Well, thank you so much for that. I wonder if you're okay giving us a little bit of the story, if you could tell us about the work, and then maybe we'll hear a little bit in case there's anybody who hasn't had a chance to check it out yet.
Okay, and it's not a problem if you haven't read the book yet. There will not be a test along with it. So Moonrise Over New Jessup follows the story of Alice Young, and she's a woman who gets off the bus in 1957 Alabama, and she ends up in this black settlement that's called New Jessup, and she's not aware of places like this. So she gets off the bus and she decides to stay a while, and really the premise of the book is that it's her story because we get to experience it through her eyes, what it is to come into a place like this, to really be able to see, my mama used to have a bunch of sayings, and one of the things she used to say is, if you can see it, you can be it. And so everywhere around her, she sees people living in these, all the different people. There's a confectionery, right? She ends up working for a seamstress, and her beloved ends up being somebody whose family has owned a repair business, and they came out of enslavement as blacksmiths. And so you see this sort of generational building really along the lines of what you would have seen in several of the 1,200 black towns and settlements that were founded in this country, that have existed in this country. And so really wanted to give voice to these communities from the inside. So I think I will read just a little bit from the beginning of the book, if that's all right. This is thicker. This paperback has like discussion questions in the back, so I'm always a little bit like, this book feels thick for some reason. I didn't give you all those words. I try to be mindful that they give you a certain amount of attention span and then they want to move on to something else. All right, so I'm just gonna read. Let's go from here.
I'm gonna cede the stage to you, and I'll be back.
Okay. So I'll read to you from when Alice first gets to New Jessup. I think we can all sort of wander in together. She's on a bus. We shushed to a stop and the bus emptied, some getting off, hugging loved ones hello, some taking luggage from the belly of the bus, and most everybody stretching, smiling, and laughing underneath the blue sky day. But the stops were all the same to me, so I stayed inside with my head against the glass, feeling the sun's warmth on the window. And that's when a red-heeled shoe clicked its way up the sidewalk. 2 of them, if I'm honest, but though it wasn't so much the shoes that caught my eye, but the bronze-stockinged legs inside them. They continued up the way towards a sidewalk cafe before disappearing through the front door. My eyes traveled from the cafe to the paved sidewalk to the row of brick front shops lining the wide avenue. The sun gleamed from the white tile at the bus depot, and a polished chrome dog leapt over the door. But a couple folks, one like me, the other nothing like me, looked around unsure of what we were seeing. When the man seated next to me returned smelling of cigarettes and shoe polish, he urged me off the bus with a dime from his own pocket. Miss, our next stop ain't for quite a while, and this here is a good place to stretch your legs. Why don't you go on inside and get yourself a Coca-Cola before we pull off again? Before stepping foot to pavement, I hovered in the doorway of that bus. To the left and the right, the avenue, the sidewalk, the storefronts extended to the horizon in either direction. But reaching the front door of the depot, the colored entrance was nowhere in sight. To my right, a shoeshine man chewed a toothpick while studying the shoe and the polish in his hands from every angle. Behind me, from the bus window, the man urged me through the door, only the last thing I needed was to get arrested just for going through the front to buy a Coke. "Help you, miss?" asked the shoeshine man. Till the words eased from his mouth, he'd done his level best to ignore me. With the weather-beaten hand-me-downs on my feet, it was no wonder why. "I'm looking for the colored entrance, please," I said to the pavement, not wanting to be pegged ignorant of city ways or where they hid the Negro doorways. "You won't find one of them here," he said. "Just walk in." "I'd prefer the colored entrance." "Please," I insisted. He seemed an unusual man, perhaps a prankster of some sort, with the long limbs, triangular head, and bulging eyes of a chameleon. Just the sort to make trouble for folks and dart away. Ain't got one of them, because ain't nothing but Negroes in this town is what I'm telling you. Look around and see if you see any other than these white folks from these buses. He smirked and returned his attention to the shoe in his hand, satisfied he knew the lay of the land. A dark brown man sold bus tickets and answered questions inside, while two soldiers in army-issue khaki rushed past me, one with the deep mulberry skin of a ready harvest, and the other, my same sun gold cinnamon, with dark freckles on his cheeks, who placed a hand on his peaked cap. A light-skinned woman with a wild mane of bottle red hair rushed into a yellow cab driven by a portly man of pecan complexion. He sped past an ebony police officer in white gloves holding palms up, meaning stop. A deep bronze man across the street wore pink-covered bib overalls, smoking a cigarette next to another bib overalled man, Cocoa Brown. And the family by the drink machine, well, the mama, she was high yellow, but her husband was a rich, deep brown to match some good, peaty soil. One child favored him, one her, and one fell to a brown somewhere in the middle, and that was just within those few feet of me at the depot. Up and down the avenue, Negroes of every shade came together like the dusk in a fall forest. I should have been glad, relieved to find such a sight of my journey, but my knees gave out and I sank onto the bench next to the shoeshine man. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. Ain't our folks' usual reaction when they first arrive in New Jessup, he said, patting my shoulder with the light taps of a man unaccustomed to comforting people. I stopped crying in time to wave the bus off, too exhausted to shed another drop. Is there a church house nearby? I asked. Pastor and Mrs. Brown would take right good care of at Morningstar Baptist, he said, and with walking directions, he sent me on my way. But after I took a couple steps up the sidewalk, he called out. When I turned, he spoke to the stain on my dress and the marks on my arm that weariness had me forgetting to hide. But miss, if you're looking for white folks, and I don't imagine that you would be, but say you are, well, you'd have to get all the way to the other side of the woods to find a single one. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. That was incredible. So even in the selection that you read and looking at some of your other works, it's clear that that place is very important to you as a person and you as a writer. Could you talk a little bit about your connection to place generally or specifically to Alabama and how it informs your writing process?
Absolutely. So I will die on this hill about how much I love Alabama. I was raised that the sins of Alabama are in the hearts of man and not in the soil. So my family has been in Alabama since before it was a state. Not because we wanted to be, but because we were. So we have been right there in Marengo County. And I think generally, like broadly, I think we need to have very different conversations about Blackness in the South. I think that things that have driven people away from the South have definitely continued this sort of family separation that was created and begun in the chattel slave trade, in the transatlantic slave trade, where we've continued to separate Black people from our families. And so when you had the Great Migration, I think now when I hear people talk about the Great Migration, and in fact I have people say, it's so much better up north, it's so much better. And my family's sort of, I don't know, standard answer is, it's different, you know? And I think it's important to have that conversation because I think the Great Migration, which was the migration of 6 million Black people out of the southern states starting in the early 20th century, it went from being a degree of magnitude, an order of magnitude, that this is 6 million people moving, to we're moving to greatness, we're moving to something better, which I think was the idea, but it wasn't always necessarily the practice.
Sure.
So we have homes here. My family has owned land in Marengo County for over 100 years. Not all of it, because obviously there were shenanigans that occurred, but for me, Alabama is absolutely home. And I think it's important to bring Black people back to the South in ways that feel like home. I'm tired of sort of this, our only narrative in the South is trauma. I think it's important to understand the fullness of our stories, but understand that the fullness of our stories includes joy and humor, includes these incredible settlement cities. I'm very proud to say the second incorporated Black municipality ever in this country is a place called Hobson City, Alabama, which during World War II was home to, it grew because there was a major army base in Anniston, and so it's sort of the companion city to Anniston. And so I want people to understand the diversity, the lushness, the beauty. I want us to stop thinking of the South generally as just full of the boogeymen of America. I think that's a very reductive telling of the story of America. And I just, I have very strong feelings about the ways that people talk about Alabama. I'll fight you about it. And I want to introduce people to Alabama as, my family has known. Imperfect and challenging, but also a place that we love.
Do you get to go back often?
Not as much. It's funny, when you write a book about Alabama, you don't get to go as home as much. I've spent the last couple of years actually on the road, and so, but my family is constantly like, well, I guess we're not going to see you for Thanksgiving, But yeah, I try to go home about 3-4 times a year, and last year was just a major challenge, so hopefully this year I'll get a chance to go back. I'm going to Mobile in July, so.
Hopefully a good problem to have, right? Wanting to get back, but being too busy.
Well, you know what though? Like, I feel it in my spirit when I don't get to go. It definitely messes with me. So, I mean, I definitely, but if I have praying aunties. So there are times when I'll have an event and I know I haven't been home, and it's really wearing on me, and I don't care where I go in the world. I'll just call my Auntie Jay, preacher's kid, my Auntie Jay, and she will give like the most beautiful prayer over me, just because she knows that that's what I need. And so that's why I say, I don't care where I am in the world, Alabama is home. Yeah.
Well, going on that idea of connecting to place and influencing your writing, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what it's like to be here in Minnesota on the Gulf Coast, and how you do or do not absorb that into your process, and what it means to be back on the Gulf.
So I actually said I wasn't going to do this. I'll talk about my new work a little bit. Sure. So my new work takes place in a settlement that's based on Africatown in Mobile, Alabama. It takes place amongst the descendants of what is known as the Clotilda. My book takes place in sort of the descendant community, like a fictionalized Africatown. So what I will do, if I can ask you to look in my pocketbook, because I need my phone for a second. Would you mind? Just to tell you, I know it's just like, it's chaos in there, but the phone is in there somewhere. Yes. But everybody, this
fellow
is
artist in residence, Beatrice Glow.
She is my roommate and a wonderful supporter and friend, and my pocketbook didn't bite her, so I'm very happy about that. To tell you what it means to be here, I will read you just a little bit of what I wrote just the other day. Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
So it's like a paragraph. She's getting on a car ferry to go back to this island. Her name is Beatty. Beatty pulled bumper to bumper with the Buick and killed the engine. Moments later, the ferry launched and they were on their way toward Alabama's last river island before the sea, a stunning yet sorry imitation for the homelands of her great-grandparents and their shipmates. Perhaps in some ancient time before memory, when eternity was just 2 days old and the continents had yet to fracture, maybe then some distant relative had once claimed this patch of land as their motherland. But this place was far from the original homeland for the Bante and the Dandi and the Fawn and the Isha and the Nupe and the Yoruba shipmates whose longing for home infused every drop of water, every crumb of soil with a homesickness so pure as to become a holiness over the island. It is an island from where the abducted traded tears crossed the water with the ones from whom they had been stolen. An island where the sea bridges remembrance rather than divides it. An island where descendants of the shipmates are swathed in ancestral lineage like fine cloth. It is an island the shipmates came to own thanks to the only 4 reckless words great-granddaddy Oluwale ever uttered, an effort that had pleased him almost equal to how it broke his heart.
Thank you.
So that's brand new a couple days ago. And the reason I wanted to share that with you is because the Gulf really makes me think about my connection to the diaspora, how those bonds were lost. And if you know the story of the Clotilda, it's the last known slave ship that illegally imported 110 Africans here in 1860. And so the ethnic groups that you heard me reading were the actual ethnic groups of the people who were stolen here. And so when you actually go to Africatown, which is the reason I'm going to Mobile this summer, and being in community with people from Africatown, there's a real sense of self, of Africanness. And I hesitate to even use the word Africanness because Africa itself is an imperialist name for a homeland for 3,000 different ethnic groups. So there's a real connection to the groups of people that came over still. And so I was trying to capture that and find the language for that. And the island in the book is called Crosswater because they are across the water from the people who they love. But it's also this idea that the water should not just be seen as a divide. And it makes me, I think, and I want the readers to hopefully feel that there's a connection with the diaspora because of the water. And it's something I grapple with, right? Because sitting there looking at the expanse, I mean, I'm looking at the Gulf of Mexico. I'm not even looking at like the Atlantic Ocean. I'm like, I can't see anything but water, right? But at the same time, for me, that feels both and. It feels like a divide and it feels like a connection. And that is something that I have had the great privilege of experiencing while I've been here.
Well, thank you again for sharing that. I can't wait to see the finished product, read the finished product whenever it's out into the world. Well, hearing you talk about all of this, I have to imagine that research plays a huge part of the process. Can you talk a little bit about how you go about that? Is it travel? Is it reading other authors? Is it primary sources? Do you have an approach? How do you go about incorporating this research into what you're creating?
You know, my research process is sort of chaotic. Obviously I start with like books because I think that's the best way to like sort of pique curiosity. The news cycle sort of raises questions, or I'll think of something, and usually we'll raise an issue. Like right now, I know a lot of people are saying we're living through a second redemption or like a second end of Reconstruction. I guess being a student of history, I think, you know, people just sort of say that because it sounds like soundbite, right? But I think there are valid reasons to say that. So I think that being sort of the student of the news cycle, but also, you know, there's nothing like sitting on a porch with what I call a super elder. So in Montgomery, my aunties live, my Auntie Jay and my Auntie Mel live 2 doors away from each other. And across the street, there's Miss Hazel. And Miss Hazel has been 99 years old for like the last 3 years. And so Miss Hazel got COVID. It gave everybody in the neighborhood COVID. I mean, because she was outside sweeping her porch, right? Sweeping like, you know, it was like she's living her life. And so one day I said, Miss Hazel, can I come over and sit with you? And she, as elders do, gave me stuff to do. So we she's like, I'm gonna fix some beans, so let's snap these beans. It's like we were doing all the things, but there's a rhythm to storytelling. And so while she's telling me these stories, these incredible stories about, the march from Selma to Montgomery and sort of the neighborhood that had been decimated by I-65 before it had been decimated, she was telling me all these stories about the neighborhood. There's that. So the research, which I think is too clinical of a word for that, because there's a cadence to storytelling that you can only get if you listen to stories. I don't think that that's research. I think it's just, being a student of the world. Another thing I love about talking to elders, they always have like newspaper clippings in microfiche in the attic. And you go up in the attic and it's some old box that's already disintegrated to dust, and they're just convinced that the microfiche is in there, but obviously it's not. But it brings back all of these wonderful stories about what they were looking for. And so that's been wonderful. And there have been, primary sources. I've had really remarkable opportunities to go to one-room schoolhouses that had been preserved. And so they had all these records, and they have like the little desks, and they have the benches. They have the little slates that the kids were using. I mean, all of that stuff is preserved in a lot of these places, and it needs to remain preserved. Because a storyteller like me comes along and says, this is our history, and it needs to be in a book. It needs to be carried forward so that future generations can see how resilient, how impressive, how incredible we were and are, what's in our blood. Everything to me is an observation, which they say be careful with writers, what you say, because it may end up in a book.
I love that. I wonder, at this confluence of being so connected to place and observing so closely, if there's anywhere that is on your list to travel, to see and experience that would maybe become a part of a future artwork in some way, novel or short story or anything like that. Is there anywhere on your list that you're like, I gotta get here? Yeah.
So I did my DNA a few years ago, and it was traced. I was able to trace my lineage back to my mama, to the Yoruba people in like what is modern day Nigeria, and the Bantu region, which is modern day Senegal. Now the Bantu people extended from north to south on the continent. I mean, it's like one of the biggest ethnic groups on the continent, and so it's sort of hard to pinpoint, even saying in Nigeria, it's a country, right? It's, Africa is a continent. And so to say the Yoruba people of Nigeria is actually a really huge deal. And so I don't know why, but for some reason, for a long time, Dakar, Senegal has always spoken to me as a place that I wanted to visit. I've never been to the continent, and this work is really, it's really challenged me in that way, to think about my ancestors. My history doesn't start with chattel slavery. My ancestors were born in the cradle of civilization. And to know that my people were people who were free on that soil. It's just, Dakar is like the place. I don't know why, but I want to go to the continent.
Well, we got to find a way to get you there. That's gonna be.
I mean.
All right. I feel like I'm being selfish. I haven't even cracked open my list of questions here.
Really?
So I want to make sure I open it up to the floor as well. Is there anybody who's got a question on mind that they would like to ask to Jamila? Yeah, over here.
Is there going to be a sequel? And I have to clarify the context that I asked that 2 books before reading yours, I read Toni Morrison's Home about the Korean vet and his sister. And in my memory, it is now one continuation of a story.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's an incredible. So Morrison's home is like, she is my literary godmother. So that's why I said if my teacher gave me a D because I sounded like Toni Morrison, that's fine. There is not what I would call a sequel, but there is a person in the book who is going to get her own book. It's not the next book, but she will get her own book. I'm planning ahead. Yeah.
Tantalizing. Good. Thank you. Good. Good to know that we can expect much more to come.
Yes.
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, it seems that both books are dealing with a kind of nostalgia for a separated and proud community, and also some utopianism, like Dorothy in Kansas, or a version of that. But, you know, I may be completely off track.
You know, I have gotten this idea that New Jessup is sort of a utopia. And I think it's important to remember that New Jessup came about because my ancestors were not welcome in what would have been the sundown town, except to work there. All right, and so the reason I sort of think about and I sort of about this word utopia is because utopia is, like you said, like Dorothy, and sort of like this perfect place, right? We expect everything there to be no problems, and that would be such a grossly disrespectful rendering of the ways that my family really experienced the South. My goal with New Jessup and with all my work is to make sure that I am telling the fullness of our stories. Because what is also to me a gross misrepresentation of our stories is that we are people who were born to be trauma. That all that we have, and you know, I take issue with that also because I think that it's important to understand the eye of that trauma, the focus, or the origin of it. Because to me, Black stories are not trauma stories. To me, Black stories, if there is trauma, in this sense, it's not because they're causing it. So I think it's important to recognize who is sort of making the communities a necessity. I think it's important also to understand that, you know, I hear this a lot about, there's a place in Washington, D.C. called Berry Farms. Berry Farms is one of the very first Black settlements founded after the Civil War. Berry Farms, because of an influx of drug activity, really suffered greatly. Berry Farms also suffered from absolute disinvestment by the city. So when you have those sort of, that confluence of things, it robs Berry Farms of what it was. You know, now people talk about it and say, oh, it's Southeast, it's a ghetto, whatever. Berry Farms was a Black community of proud people. I think it's important to understand what really happened to Greenwood. Greenwood didn't go away because Black people burned it up, right? So I think it's important when we talk about these communities, I think the word utopia, I sort of bristle because I think it reduces a Black community to this idea that it either has to be perfect or it deserves to be wiped off the face of the earth. And I don't think either of those things are true. So I appreciate your question. Whenever I hear the word utopia, my ears perk up a little bit.
Thank you for that. And thank you for the question and comment. Yeah, right here.
I have two questions. First is a very mundane one. When you are learning stories, how do you record them on your phone?
If they let me. I mean, it really depends. Sometimes I write things down. A lot of times I take photographs of photographs. So if I'm going through an old family photo album, I'll take a lot of photographs. And a lot of the stories, like at least 3 family anecdotes were in the piece that I've read to you. It's stuff that's been drilled into me forever. So it just sort of depends on where I am at the time.
So the second question, and pardon me, I'm northern, so maybe if the question is misplaced, say so. You talk about the South and the importance of land. When I think of the South, I also think about the importance of religion and church.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
If that's accurate, how will your future works integrate that?
That's actually an incredible question. So thank you for that, because in my new book, it actually talks about the syncretic nature of Black faith traditions. So the ways that our ancestors brought the Yoruba religion, the Dindi, how we've incorporated, even sort of in Christianity, like my church in DC, we have Yoruba deities and it's an AME church, right? But we recognize that we are not, like AME is not our original faith tradition. So it's important to pay homage to that to the syncretic way that we worship. And just a quick anecdote about Africatown, there was a man who was enslaved. He was in the Dahomey royal family, and they were Muslim. And for some reason, who nobody really ever documented, he was sold by his cousin to be one of the 110 who was sent away. And so in Africatown, there's Union Baptist Church. It was founded by African people who were part of the Clotilda. And this man, his name was Peter Gumba Lee, who maintained his Islam faith. Every Sunday morning before the church opened, he would go in there to worship, to do his morning prayers, and it was just on Sunday mornings, because he felt like God was there. And I think it's important to recognize that theology is, as we're taught it, we've been taught that our hoodoo, the things that we came up learning about roots, all that stuff is sort of told to us to be bad. You go to the church, and somebody's gonna put something around your neck if you just finish singing. Like we still practice all of these traditions, even if we're not cognizant of it, even if we've been told that it's wrong. It's still very much part of our church. And so I think it's important to recognize that, but to recognize how faith operates through all of us, because I think faith by definition is something individual. I think church and theology is community, but the way that faith works it speaks to us all in different ways. So I appreciate that question, because it's something I've really been working on, particularly with this new work.
Thank you. Yeah, in the back, right over there.
This is completely different angle. How did storytelling, you as a storyteller, affect you as a lawyer? And how did you as a lawyer affect your storytelling?
I think I liked being a trial attorney for the opening statement, the closing argument, and the fact sections, right? I mean, it was really an opportunity to get up and advocate through storytelling.
Yeah.
So, but then when you get down to the nuts and bolts of actual practice, I mean, sitting through a deposition is, I mean, they give you 8 hours with the same person. That could be torture, right? Or arguing about, discovery and things like that. So I think the storytelling has to be an important part of lawyering, because at the end of the day, we are advocating for a position. And if we're just sort of, I know not everybody represents people. I represented people. And so I wanted the judge, the jury, opposing counsel to understand that the decisions that they were making, that in my mind were always inconsistent with the law, they were actually making decisions that harmed real people. And I think you're seeing that a lot in the current litigation landscape. You're seeing real federal employees being harmed. And you're seeing real people real children who are not having access to food, or you're seeing real cancer trials ended, right? And so then that litigation is dealing with real stories. In the storytelling realm, I think for me, you can see I'm an advocate. I can't turn that off. It's literally, I'm literally probably the most boring person at any sort of event, because all I want to talk about is like social justice. But I mean, I think it's really important for me to walk in a particular way, because if I'm not walking in this particular light to the point about how I'm walking in my faith, then I don't know how else to be. And so to be a storyteller to me means to be making sure at all times that I'm doing justice, I'm loving mercy, and I'm walking humbly in accordance with my faith, and doing the best by whatever story I'm telling, whether it's in a courtroom or on a page, that I can. Because, you know, my ancestors, my elders deserve that.
Very nice, very nice.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Somebody's over here has a question. Yes.
I was fascinated when you said 3 things were little anecdotes or wrong, that you, in what you read, 3 things were family stories. So give us an example.
I can't do that.
Were the shoes, like, was that part of, what was passed down from your family that was in this?
So here's the thing. I have Easter eggs in my work, and part of it is my family, as much as they love New Jessup, they said, we love that this is fiction. But don't go telling all our business. You know? I made them a promise that our little secrets would remain secrets. I think I did too.
I think that's the fascinating part of the materials of our lives and showing up in work, and that perhaps slight but incredibly important lens through which it gets fictionalized and becomes a part of another person's life, right? Not just you and not just the family, but and that I think is the artistry, right? That's the thing. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Time for 1 or 2 more. I'll probably say the last one. Yeah.
Short one. The book Moonrise Over New Jessup. Okay. Somehow I want you to talk about this moonrise. And then, is this a play on this evening, Moonrise Over New York?
I believe so.
That's our attempt at cleverness. It pales in comparison to the person I'm sitting next to. We do new work at the Hermitage.
I was going to presume that, but I did not want to interpret it.
Yes.
But if you can, would love to hear a little bit about the moon.
Yeah. So
Yes.
in the so the title's a bit titly. It's a little long. But so the book you'll see has this black cover, and I wanted it to be like this really rich black, and it's got this spray of flowers, and a lot of these flowers are flowers that I grew up hearing about, learning about, smelling myself. But there are moonflowers in here and gardenias, which bloom at night. And so the idea was, I wanted the blackness in the cover to represent 3 things. The black belt soil where my family's from, black skin, and the night sky. And so the moonrise is Alice, and once she is sort of surrounded by blackness, she's able to rise and shine. And so the cover, the moonrise, it's all this sort of play on just lushness and the ability to thrive when you're in a really rich environment.
Beautiful.
Amazing, thank you. 1 more before I steal the last one? Don't be scared. Yeah?
I'll ask one. So related to the sense of place, James asked you about Minnesota Key and you spoke about Alabama. I'm curious, Bookstore One, the Hermitage, we like to think of ourselves as creative oases within Florida. I'm curious your impression of sort of the Florida artistic and literary tradition, and if your visit here has altered that.
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't say it's altered it. I've always had a very high opinion of Florida, the art scene. I mean, y'all have, well, I will say she's a native of Alabama. She was born there, but Zora Neale Hurston, who was another literary godmother of mine. But just reading her writing about Florida, coming up here, it was really an introduction to a place that I had never been. And so to come and sort of see and to experience the lushness of life that she talked about in her work, it really feels like a different kind of homecoming. And then the art scene obviously here is just so incredible. So I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to sort of leave my little stamp on it. I think it's so bold.
I'm gonna steal one more. But before I do, just a couple of things that I didn't give at the top. I want to just thank the Charles and Marjorie Barancik Foundation, the Gulf Coast Community Foundation for their support that they give to us to help make these things possible, and a very special thank you to Bookstore One, but particularly Georgia Court and Robin Radin for sponsoring Jamila's residency. We wouldn't be here without you, so thank you very much. All right. This has been a fantastic conversation. I have so many new ideas to walk away with, but I'm wondering, what do you do when you need to turn it off? When you just want to like veg out and not think about how to save the world, which you are doing? What's your cultural cotton candy? What are you listening to? What are you watching on television or movies? Like, what's your guilty pleasure? What are you reading?
Well, and I will say this only because I've had such an extraordinary chance to do it here. So I will say what I've been doing here. I walk on the beach every day, and I listen to and sing gospel music to the ocean or to the sea. And that has been, I receive more from that than I give. I like to think I'm a decent singer, but that has really been like, music is really important to me, and also just the ability to be outside. I come from a hunting family, so being outside for me is air. I mean, literally air, but I need to be outside. I mean, you can see I'm brown, so that's not by accident. But so yeah, those are sort of I need to move and I need to sing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
If you don't have it yet, I believe Bookstore One has the book downstairs if you want to pick up a copy, and maybe if you ask nicely, we could get a signed one.
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Okay. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Oh, you got surveys on your way in. Those are really helpful to us. If you could take a moment and tell us what you thought. Thank you. Have a